Welcome to the Startup of the Year podcast, where each episode we showcase exciting new companies from around the world. This podcast is produced by Established, creators of the Startup of the Year program. Established is focused on helping organizations with their innovation, startup, and communication strategies.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Startup of the Year podcast. I'm Frank Gruber, the co-founder and co-CEO of Established, and your host for this podcast. On this episode, I'm talking to Rohit Bhargava. We met over a decade ago in Washington, D.C., and we were both early bloggers and the dawn of a social media era. So it's been a while, and I just remember thinking back to that first time we were on a session together at a conference called the New Internet Conference, and the panel was pretty amazing. It included Rohit, myself, and Gary Vaynerchuk, who many of you know as Gary V, as well as Jeff Livingston, who's an author and strategist and photographer and digital marketing pioneer. And so it's really a great session, and this is back in 2007, so quite a while ago. And it's obviously great to watch everyone's careers grow and become what they are today. So really great stuff. And Rohit is an innovator and marketing expert and founder of the Non-Obvious company. And he's got a number of best-selling books. He's published himself, as well as he also runs a publishing company. He's got six business books out there in the world, so probably stumbled across one at some point. And he's also recently wrote a book called The Non-Obvious Megatrends, which is basically a culmination of a decade of non-obvious trend books. So he's been keeping track of trends for over a decade now. He put them into a book format every single year, and now here's his kind of megatrends version, which is actually his last version. And so it's also newsworthy because, basically we're in a new year, and Rohit is hosting a summit coming up here, the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit, coming up January 26th through 29th. I'm actually going to be speaking on it about investing in diverse startups, and along with some of the companies that have been through the Startup of the Year program that we've invested in. Courtney Caldwell from ShearShare, Travis Holloway from Solo Funds, who won our Startup of the Year this year, Ash Kumra from Peak Mindful, which I'm an advisor of, and then Marlon Nichols is an investor. He's an investor out on the West Coast, but invests all over, from Mac Venture Capital, and Allison Capon is from the W Fund, and she invests in women-led startups. Marlon actually has invested in Solo Funds and a number of others as well. So really great. If you're interested in attending, you can go to nonobviousdiversity.com. Again, www.nonobviousdiversity.com. Register for the summit coming up. It's coming up January 6th through 29th, and it'll be more than just about startups. There'll be a number of topics, 150 speakers, and great stuff. It'll be coming out of it for that next week. So before we jump into the interview, though, I wanted to invite you all to be a part of some of our programs. So at Established, the company that produces the Startup of the Year, we work with a number of different programs and in the startup space and ecosystem. And if you go to established.us/programs, you can see some of them. They include the Startup of the Year, as well as NASA iTech. We also work with AFWERX or the U.S. Air Force. AFWERX is their innovation arm, if you will. And so a lot going on there, a lot of great stuff coming down the pike here, and we're always working with new different groups, so definitely want to be informed. So go to established.us/programs to get on our list, and we'll send you the latest updates once they come in from these various programs we work with. All right, so basically had a chance to sit down with Rohit recently and catch up. Wanted to share the interview here, so let's listen into my conversation with Rohit Bhargava.
Can you share what is a non-obvious trend for all those listening?
Yeah, so we hear a lot about trends, and my inspiration 10 years ago when I started doing this annual trend report that then turned into an annual book, which eventually turned into Megatrends, was to try and do something non-obvious. I mean, that's literally the title. And the problem that I saw with so many different trend reports and predictions was that they were totally blatantly obvious, and they were just observing things that existed. Like somebody would write a trend report and they'd say the hottest trend of the new year is going to be drones. And you're like, dude, that's just like something that exists. Where's the actual trend? Where's the direction?
Right.
And so for me, like my definition of a trend, a non-obvious trend, is that it's a curated observation of the accelerating present. And so really what I try and teach people is like, how do you observe and understand the accelerating present?
So you touched on a couple of things there that brought my curiosity. How do you become a curator to do that? And why is that important for everyone watching?
Well, I think that what great curators do is two things. One is that they train their power of observation to be able to see what other people just walk past.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people ask me, like, look, is there a certain type of person that does this better than anyone? And if you remember, like that video, that social experiment video with the gorilla going in the middle when people are passing the basketball, a lot of, it's like super popular, right? Like people are passing the basketball, you tell them to count the number of times the basketball has been passed, and a guy in a gorilla suit walks through the middle, and you don't see him because you're focused on the ball being passed.
Yep. Right.
And then when people say, "Oh, did you see the gorilla?" or if you know it, right, you see the gorilla. And like the question I ask people afterwards is, the people who see the gorilla, they're not just like natural gorilla noticers. Like they don't notice a gorilla better than anyone else, right? They just know what to look for. And to me, like that's what a curator also does. They pay attention, they observe, and then the second piece of it is they take lots of different things, they put them together and say, look, this is a bigger theme, this is a bigger message. And that's what curators in museums do, right? They choose artwork, they put it in an exhibit, and then they say, here's the theme of this artwork. And they don't put up everything. They have lots of stuff that's in storage. And so part of it is deciding what not to pay attention to. And that's the other part of curation.
Right. So I'm very interested in your process. And I know you've got a method that you do this. Can you share, like, how do you identify, first let's share the process and how you identify those non-obvious trends.
Yeah, my process, I call it the haystack method. And the reason why I do that is sort of to flip the cliche of looking for a needle in a haystack on its head. And so to me, the haystack method is all about gathering the hay. It's not about the needle, it's about the hay. And the hay is the information, is the stories. And the more time you spend, the more you can train yourself to pay attention to all of these stories and all of these different spaces and different industries and different verticals, the more you can put it together and say, this is what this is what it means. This is what the trend is. This is what the needle is. And you take your own needle and you stick it in the middle and you say, this is the meaning. And that's what this method is all about. It's about training yourself to pay attention to lots and lots of stuff, not just the stuff that social media serves up for you or the stuff that people who agree with you share with you. It intentionally goes and reads, it's about intentionally going and reading things or watching things you don't agree with. It's about intentionally getting outside of your own bubble. And it's really not that easy to do because we're just so surrounded by stuff that is delivered to us that you really have to try hard to break out of it.
That makes sense. And I think I read that you look at magazines, right? You try to get to get out of that bubble because we are, there's algorithms literally keeping us in our bubble right now. So how you share some of the ways you get out?
Yeah. So, everybody who's watching this is probably pretty savvy about how the internet works, right? So we all of us are us tech savvy people. And I think we're all in this kind of family together of tech savvy people, understand that when we search, like when you search for something on Google or when I search for something on Google, we get different results.
Right.
First of all, there's a lot of people in the world who don't understand that. They think that what you see is what I see. And so they don't understand how you could believe something different than me because you're reading the same thing. How can you be so stupid? And that's not actually the case. Like we see different media. And for me, magazines are a beautiful way to get outside of that algorithmic bias because the magazine that I pick up is the same one that you pick up. And not only that, but if I pick up a magazine that's not intended for me, so if I read Teen Vogue magazine, which is for 16-year-old girls, or I read Modern Farmer magazine, which is for modern farmers, which I'm not,
No, but I love that magazine. It's a great magazine.
It is, and Monocle magazine, which is amazing for anybody who lives in the US because it's not about America, and so much of what we hear here is just about what's happening in America. And so we create these bubbles and then we're reinforced with those bubbles because of social media. And print media is a great way to get out of that because it's not biased or tailored to who you are. There's no ads being served based on you having looked for that last set of dumbbells, and so it's like none of that stuff is tailored to you. It's the same, and that's really, really important.
Definitely. Okay, so how do you identify, or actually, how do you know like if a trend is a trend versus a non-obvious trend? I guess you talked about a little bit, but I want to make sure people are spotting these things, thinking, oh, I thought that was a trend, and they're trendsetters and all this stuff. Can you share a little bit more about how you do it and what the difference is?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that I look for in order for something to be what I would call a non-obvious trend is it changing the way that we think or do business in terms of what we buy or sell in multiple industries? So if it's just affecting the financial sector, for example, it's unlikely to be what I call a non-obvious trend. If, however, it's affecting multiple industries, if it's affecting financial services, if it's affecting healthcare, if it's affecting retail, if it's affecting travel, and you find examples of the same thing across multiple sectors, then it could be something that I, in my method, would elevate to call a trend.
Okay. More questions about non-obvious trends. Do new trends make old trends not true?
Sometimes. But what I tend to find more often is that an old trend, and look, I have a lot of experience with old trends because every year I do this report. Yeah, I do this report. I have a new version of this book every year.
Right.
And up until Megatrends, which was the last edition, and we could definitely talk about why.
Yeah.
But every year there's been 15 new trends. And the Megatrends book did not do that. It had 10 what I called megatrends, and the megatrends each incorporate there it is right there.
Megatrends.
And each one of those megatrends incorporate lots of the kind of old trends.
Right.
But what ends up happening over time is that a trend, the way I describe it, either continues to accelerate or it fades away. It was a temporary thing. And I'm pretty transparent about the fact that I have not gotten all of these trends completely right, and that they haven't lasted over time. In fact, at the back of that book, there's an appendix, a detailed appendix that gives a letter grade to every one of those past trends, more than 100 of them, in terms of whether they continued to accelerate over time or not. And so because I'm not afraid to say when I got things wrong, and it's not just based on me looking at it and saying, hey, I was wrong or I was right. It's based on all of these workshops I've done, and before the pandemic, all of these kind of keynotes and in being in the room with people talking about these trends, and then being with them afterwards as we sort of explored them to say, hey, I don't think this one's actually continuing, at least not in the way that you wrote about it, right? And so it's based on all of that feedback and this whole panel of kind of trend curators that I've built through the non-obvious, we call it the non-obvious nation. It's like our online community, right? And the idea is that the more transparency we can put behind these, the more we can actually spotlight what does really matter.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the book. I mean, I had it here. It's a great book. It's got 9 mega trends in the book, but obviously you've captured all those trends over the last 10 years.
Well, it's got 10, but I think one of the pages kind of mistakenly put 9 on the list.
Okay.
So, yeah, but there's 10 total. There's 10 total.
10 total. Okay.
Yep.
I just have a like for the number 9, I guess. So now you've got these 10 mega trends in the book. Can you share the top trends that kind of stood out the most? And actually, we should talk a little bit about this. This book came out in January, right?
Yes, it did.
2020, January 2020, when the world was a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so you were playing, you were coming up with these mega trends way before that. How have they held up first? And then let's dive into the ones that you think are the most interesting right now.
Yeah, that was the first, as soon as kind of everything changed, one of the first things that I started doing is I shifted my perspective and I said, look, I'm going to have to get good at this virtual thing.
Right.
Presenting virtually, teaching virtually, doing all of that stuff. Right. And I figured, just with everything else in my life, that the only way I'm going to get better at it is by continually doing it.
Right.
And so I started saying yes to almost everything. And what ended up happening was basically over the summer, the American summer, so May to like August, I did more than 100 events.
Wow.
So I did
You're used to being at events in person, but how many do you do in a year usually?
So in person, before the pandemic, I was doing between 40 and 50 live events a year.
Right. Wow.
But that requires you getting on a plane and, usually and going somewhere. And so that's a lot of travel.
Yes.
If you're doing it from home and generally they're a little bit shorter, I mean, you can do them much more quickly. And so not only was I doing a lot of those virtual talks, I mean, I did a virtual session at South by Southwest. I did like a couple of other higher profile ones, the virtual South by Southwest that they used to replace the actual one, which I know we were going to hang out at. And so we still owe each other a beer from that.
Right.
We'll make happen at some point.
Yep.
But beyond that, I was also I was experimenting with different formats, right? Instead of just me solo talking, I was doing interviews where I would interview someone or someone would interview me, and we would do it more interactively, or we would use breakout rooms, or we would do all of this stuff, all of these different things.
Right.
And the question I would get all the time is, look, you published a book about trends. It's so-called mega trends. It's 2020. It's supposed to, because I said I'm not going to do this book anymore. Right. I wanted it to be a 10-year project, like as I said. So this was the last version. And I announced that kind of before the pandemic. That was sort of last year I announced this is going to be the last one.
Right.
And so my lens for megatrends was not just a year. It was meant to be a decade. Right. And now the pandemic hits 2 months after this book comes out that's supposed to be about the next decade. And of course, everyone's like, look, is this still right? Is this correct?
Right. Yeah, because everyone's patterns have changed. The stuff we're doing has changed. Yeah,
totally. Yep. And so it really caused me to do some soul searching, right? And not only soul searching, but more research. I mean, I went back in, I started looking at the stories, and they're pretty deeply researched already in terms of every one of these mega trends not only has other trends from the past, but has probably 30, 40, 50 stories behind it. So if you search through the index and the kind of list of resources, I mean, we stopped printing it in the book because it would just take too many pages.
Right. It's amazing.
Now you have to go online to actually read all the sources, right?
It goes back to that process though, right? That haystack
totally.
process.
Yeah, totally. And what I started to find is that some trends accelerated faster because of what's happened with the pandemic. And what I started talking about was, well, why has this happened? And part of the reason why it's happened is that we never lacked the ability to be innovative, I don't think. What we lacked was a way of breaking down the barriers to innovation. And what's happened because of the pandemic is many of those barriers have been forced to have been broken down. So it's almost like, the water was at the dam, and then there became a crack in the dam, and all of a sudden it's like now that crack's turned into like the water's just flowing. Right. And what has ended up happening is things that we anticipated would take much longer to get to the point that they are now, such as online education, have happened much faster because all of our kids are doing online education and virtual schooling. Right. And so those sorts of shifts are changing the way that we are used to getting products and services delivered to us, the business model of subscribing to things instead of owning them, the idea that we can learn remotely from anywhere and from anyone and faster. I mean, these are all factored into some of these mega trends that I had written about. And so that's what ends up happening with many of them. They don't actually go away. They have either remained or accelerated much faster than I thought they would.
That makes sense. So I don't want to go through all 10 of them because of time. And, I wanted to hone in on the maybe 3 or 4 that you think are the most important to kind of think about right now as, a bunch of innovators that are watching and listening, might be able to hone in and learn something from.
Yeah. So let's talk about from a startup point of view, right? Like what are the ones that would perhaps be most impactful for anybody who's a startup founder or an entrepreneur to think about?
Yeah.
One of them that I wrote about was, it really has 2 parts to it, and I called it flux commerce. Okay. And flux commerce was a mega trend that described, number one, the idea that the business model behind how we make money is starting to shift. So the simplified example is things that we used to buy, we now subscribe to. Right. But there's more versions of that. There's trade and barter type economies that are now coming in. There's the sharing economy, which has evolved to the next stage, which is, who even owns this stuff in the first place, and do we even need that? Right. That's one side of it. The other side of it is what I called the industry blur, which is we used to have verticals. It was like I was in financial services, you were in healthcare, you were in travel, and now the lines are blurring between those things, right? I mean, you have medical tourism, you have coffee shops that are owned by banks, you have Taco Bell opening up a hotel, you have Crayon making makeup. All of these are examples of companies that used to be in one vertical saying, look, I'm going to go into this other vertical because that's an opportunity for me. And I don't need to stick in this single solo vertical anymore. And so this diversification idea behind business is a really important one, I think, for entrepreneurs to think about. And it's been really important for me to think about too, because I mean, as we talked about before the pandemic, I was doing 50 events a year and getting paid to speak at those. And that's a lot of income that's basically gone away.
Right.
And I know a lot of my friends, good friends, and fellow speakers have really struggled because that was their income.
Right.
And for me as an entrepreneur, I had a second business, and my other business is a book publishing company.
Yes.
And even though the speaking has gone away, the book publishing has actually accelerated because more people like me are saying, look, I can't speak right now, so I'm going to accelerate my process for writing my next book.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about that publishing company? Because you're doing multiple things. You're literally doing 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah, I mean, it is diversification. It's entrepreneurial diversification as opposed to financial diversification, right? So like we all hear about, like, you shouldn't put all your money in stocks. You shouldn't put all your money in this one thing, right? We should move our money around. And we generally, I mean, smart people generally know that.
Right.
But we don't tend to think about our entrepreneurial ventures the same way, right? We're all in. Like there's a lot of romanticism attached to, like, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm working at this thing for like X number of hours to get it off the ground because, like, that's what entrepreneurs do, and we live and breathe it. Mm-hmm. And we sort of dismissed those who have a little bit over here and a little bit over there as being unfocused.
Right.
And if we shifted the perspective a little bit to say they're diversified,
it
actually turns out to be pretty useful when a
Makes
pandemic hits or something like that, right?
Right. Yeah. No, totally.
And you know, for me, the publishing company was sort of a labor of love that I accidentally created. So I had published my first 2 books with large New York publishers, and I was dissatisfied with the level of control. And like an entrepreneur, I mean, look, if anybody who's sold a book, I mean, you know this, like anybody who's sold a book to a publisher and then written it and gotten an advance, I mean, when you do that, you take money from the publisher, which means you become the employee and they're the employer and you're writing the book for them.
Right.
So anybody who's entrepreneurial and has not worked for anyone for a long time, and now all of a sudden they do their book and they become an employee and they're treated like an employee, that sucks. You know what? Right. And so I built this publishing company to flip it around. And it's I didn't invent the industry. I mean, this industry already exists. It's called hybrid publishing. What it essentially means is you pay the publisher, and the publisher provides, hopefully, if they're good, they provide expert services to help you create a great book, print a great book, and distribute it to bookstores and online and everywhere. And that model had already existed, but nobody was doing it at the level that I wanted to do it, which was, you know, for a New York Times bestselling author of a business book to get what they actually need. So these are not, you know, self-published books that are printed on demand or shipped off to China. These are beautiful books.
Yep.
And that's what I wanted to do, because I'm a brand guy, right? Like I want something that is beautiful looking, that's beautifully branded, and that I could put out there and say, look, I've worked for a year or 2 or 3 on this thing and I'm proud of it. Right. And that didn't really exist. And so that was the opportunity, right? But that's what diversification let me do. So now that the pandemic hit and the speaking's gone away, I've spent more time focused on that.
That makes sense. Let's dive back into some of those mega trends. So you mentioned one, the flux commerce. Let's talk about any others that pop out that startups or entrepreneurs should be thinking about right now.
Yeah, there's another one that sort of alludes to something I spoke about earlier, which is education. But the mega trend I wrote about was instant knowledge. Right. And there's a couple of components to this, and it's driven by this human belief that we can learn anything faster because we have access to all these tools at our fingertips. And part of the story, one of the stories that inspired this megatrend was me reading about an 8-year-old who had the munchies in the evening and decided to teach himself how to drive on YouTube so he could drive to McDonald's and go through the drive-through. Which is like terrifying
dangerous.
as a father, right? Like that probably terrifies you too.
Yes.
But it was interesting because, like, here's this 8-year-old who's like, I can teach myself how to drive on YouTube, right? And like 10 years from now, what's that 8-year-old going to say about the college crush, right? I mean, when he has that conversation, does he need to go to college? Like, and I think that it's a double-edged sword, right? Because just because we have knowledge at our fingertips doesn't mean we have mastery or wisdom. And to some degree, it diminishes that because it's hard to master something by watching a YouTube video. But at the same time, if we have all this information at our fingertips, like we have the ability to figure anything out faster. So like even with the pandemic, I've just been watching videos about like switchers and audio and cameras and how to get this, you know, the blurry background, and like that's all YouTube videos. I didn't do a course on any of that stuff. I didn't do film production. I just tried to figure it out. And this mentality that we can just figure stuff out is leading to lots of opportunity. I mean, for us, one of the reasons why with the non-obvious company, like one of the reasons why I didn't choose to do the trend book anymore is because I wanted to shift the perspective of the company away from just doing the trend reports to providing useful insights. And so we built out something that we called the Non-Obvious Guide series, which is a series of guidebooks that are meant to compete with the dummies guides.
Gotcha.
And the whole tagline behind those is that it's smart advice for smart people, because you're not an idiot, you're not a dummy. You expect to figure this stuff out. And those books were created in the 90s for a different mentality. And people don't have that mentality anymore. And so why are we still reading these 400-page useless books?
It's interesting you bring that up. We spoke with Mike Evans, who's the co-founder of Grubhub recently, earlier today. And he basically talked about how he got the Sales for Dummies book, and that's what taught him to go out and it actually did help him get his first sale, through learning that. But you're right; those have not been. That was 15 years ago. Probably that our book was probably written 20 years ago.
Yeah, so, and the thing is, I'm sure that he got it because there was nothing else.
Right.
And so it's sort of like finding that diamond piece of advice in the middle of crap. I picked up lots of these dummies guys when I was doing research, and one of them, I remember I picked up one on internet marketing, and it had an entire page defining what a friend is. Does anyone need that? No, that's why those guides are 400 pages long. So maybe you'll find the 17 pages that are actually useful, but you got to dig through 400 pages to do it. And who wants to do that?
Right.
Literally no one.
You've put out some of those guides. You put one right after the pandemic kind of hit around virtual meetings, right? So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I did the non-obvious guide basically to working virtually, and it was everything that I had learned in the last decade of working remotely myself, because my office is in my house. I'm used to doing that. But also, what does it take to be effective in virtual meetings? How do you avoid that Zoom fatigue? How do you lead a virtual team? Because most of the teams that I work with and the freelancers that I work with on the publishing side or otherwise, now, a lot of times we haven't met in person, but we collaborate. And we collaborate all the time. And so how do you do that effectively? These were questions that were urgent for people. And I remember it was the weekend that South by Southwest got canceled. It was the middle of March.
Right.
And that was when I decided I was going to write this book. And I spent the next 4 or 5 weeks doing interviews and research. And then I wrote the book in 4 weeks after that.
Wow.
And part of it's, yes, I'm a fast writer, but I spent an equivalent amount of time researching and interviewing as I did writing, because the more time I spent up front doing that, the faster the writing was on the back end. Right.
But that's pretty phenomenally fast. Most publishers would not be able to get something out that quick ever. Right. So
we did all that, and then we got the book out in late May, early June.
Right.
And so that's one of the benefits of owning the whole ecosystem, right? I know how it works. I know how quickly I can get stuff done. I know who I can lean on to say, hey, just, jump this to the top of the queue because I've given you $1 million worth of printing jobs in the, past 2 years. And, so I do have the ability to maybe accelerate stuff more than anyone else would. But also it was just this idea that I had figured some stuff out because I had to. And if I could put it into a book form that would be useful for people, and eventually into an online training, which is what we're working on right now, that would be of benefit for people.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to get it out of my head. And also my response to being grounded at home was to start writing, because I'm a writer.
You got all this time back. You don't have to travel, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you can't do that. And and it's amazing as a publisher, I will tell you this, and I think you know this, that the number of people who have written and published a book who hate writing is surprisingly high. And it's tough because there are people who have amazing ideas, but they're not writers. Right. And for me, look, I'm an English major. I did a master's degree in English. I've always been a writer. And so that has helped me in many different ways. And when it comes to getting a book out this quickly, it's definitely been beneficial because I can sit down and I can write relatively quickly, and I can write on a deadline, which is basically what real writers do. I mean, journalists, they always write on a deadline.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, let's dive back into maybe one more mega trend that you think might be helpful, and then maybe if we have a little more time, I want to talk about. Well, that actually might eat it up. So let's just dive into one more mega trend. Okay. Which one do you want? Which one do you want to talk about?
Let's talk about one that a lot of people have asked about. Probably one of the most popular mega trends.
Yep.
And it was something I called revivalism. And revivalism was an observation of the fact that the more, and then remember, this was written before the pandemic,
Right.
but it became even more relevant because of the pandemic. So before the pandemic, there was already, people were kind of calling it the tech backlash, right? The idea that we wanted to get away from our devices. We just wanted some alone time. We wanted some me time. We wanted to go off in the woods and not always be connected with the beeping and the dings and the alerts and all of that stuff.
Right.
And so we started rediscovering things that made us nostalgic for the past. You know, TV shows were coming back. Sir Patrick Stewart went back to playing Picard. We were listening to vinyl music again. We were playing board games again. You know, all of that stuff was already happening because of the pandemic. And then we got stuck at home. And now all of a sudden people are puzzling, you know, they're buying puzzles at home.
Right. I did a couple puzzles here. Yeah. Probably
I mean, we always have a puzzle sitting there right now. And even more so, we kind of went backwards in time, and the macro vision behind this megatrend, right? So beyond just kind of the stuff like reconnecting with the old stuff that we remember, the macro reason for it is because in many ways, we feel like the world right now is just not trustworthy. We're always being lied to. The politicians are lying to us. The news is lying to us. We feel under assault by lies.
Right. You're calling that, you call that trend untruthing, right? Or truth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, truthing was like one of the past trends. And it was this idea that and that was actually part of the revivalism megatrend.
Right.
And the idea behind that was good memory, by the way. The idea behind truthing is if we don't know what to trust, we retreat into our own beliefs and we trust what we already know or what we remember.
What you feel comfortable with.
What you feel comfortable with.
Some uses
why nostalgia became such a big force, right? Because we turn backwards and we always see the past as having been much more trustworthy than now.
And the funny part is our memory goes as we get older. So is that really what it was like, or is, you know?
Well, that is something, right? Because I can choose. I have this beautiful luxury that my kids don't have of choosing to remember myself as way more awesome in high school than I actually was.
Right.
Whereas
there's no photos or video of that. Like there's nothing,
they have videos and proof and like all of this stuff. So they have to remember themselves exactly the way they were because there's the evidence, right? I don't have any. You don't have any pictures of me from high school, right? So like you don't have any evidence. I can tell you anything.
Yeah, no, we always to say, you know, listen, it's probably a good thing we didn't have that stuff, especially in college and some of those other times when you're like, wow, it's got to be really tough, you know?
Yeah, and you'll find the occasional photo that like an old college buddy posts online, and you're like, ooh, maybe don't tag me in that one.
Exactly. All right, cool. So going back to that, so how can we think about that as you're building out technology or startups?
So one of the very practical ways to think about this revivalism is something that I used to call the downgraded mode. So for example, my phone, I'm not an Apple guy, so I have a Samsung phone.
Yep.
And since I got my phone, there's always been a low battery kind of option on the phone. So for example, if I'm down to 5% battery life, I can go into low power mode, and low power mode disables all of the colors, all of the kind of, stuff that goes on in the background. And it basically just allows me to do phone calls, texting. And, at that time they had Facebook because apparently that's mission critical.
Wait, I love that. That's a great hack. My phone has something similar and my watch does too. And I've been thinking this whole time, should I get a light phone or one of these other minimalistic phones? All I need to do is find the button.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just go to the low power mode and it'll literally change the view, and it just gives you like four things, and it's all in like a duotone, so there's no color. Right. And now your 5% battery life will last for another 17 hours.
Right.
And I think that, that's the downgraded mode. And I think that as we build technology, we forget about that mode. We don't build that in. We don't give people that option to just get the basics. And we could. And sometimes that would be the optimal way to do something. Like we overthink stuff, and my car, I have two cars. One is a 12-year-old car and the other one is like a 5-year-old car. And the 5-year-old car has one of those keys that you take the key into the car and then you press the button. It's like a push button start. Right. And I always lose the keys and I have nowhere to put them.
Right.
My old car, my 12-year-old car has an actual key that you actually put in and you turn it. And I never lose those keys, and so why did we need that push button thing? We didn't. I actually enjoy taking a key and sticking it in the car. And I don't even know if they make cars like that anymore. Right. And so there's a downgraded option right there. I would choose, if I had a choice, I would choose the key that I could stick into the car and turn it on. Because I wouldn't lose that.
No, yeah, that's a great point. I mean, even with like travel and airports, I haven't been doing as much of that, but I always print out my ticket because I want to have the paper ticket so that I don't get to
I know, me too.
that checkpoint and then my phone doesn't work and I can't get in and they send me to the back or something. You always have that backup. And so I definitely understand that. That's definitely a good one to remember and think about as people are building things. So this has been really, really interesting. You just are a wealth of information and knowledge, and I really appreciate you joining us today. Where can people connect with you if they wanted to find you?
So the easiest are two things. One is I publish a newsletter every Thursday, which is the most interesting and non-obvious stories of the week. And I spend hours every week curating that and trying to find the most interesting stories. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So you can subscribe to that just by going to nonobvious.com/subscribe. And the other thing is every week I do a video show, the Non-Obvious Insights show, where I interview someone different about something that they're working on. And so I've had some amazing guests so far. I've had Dan Pink, Guy Kawasaki, Francesca Gino, Mark Atunis, Tom Fishburne. I mean, amazing guests. And I'll continue to do that. And that's on YouTube. So if you just go to youtube.com/Rohit Bhargava, that's my name. That's my channel. Every Thursday at noon Eastern, I do a live version of that show.
Wow. Every Thursday, noon Eastern, go subscribe so you can get the updates and you can follow along the newsletter as well. Some great articles are shared in things that are going to probably bubble up to be the next mega trends, but obviously you're not doing that book anymore. So we got to follow the newsletter. So that's the way we'll find it. For those of you that haven't yet, check out this book. It's out there. You can go get it, get a real physical copy, or there's a bunch of different ways to get it as well. And Rohit, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Well, I hope you all learned something about business or marketing or trends. Rohit's just a wealth of information and really interesting guy. Love catching up with him. And hopefully you're registered for the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit. Again, coming up here soon. It's at nonobviousdiversity.com. There's going to be a plethora of speakers. You're not going to want to miss it as we all work together to create a more inclusive world. Really excited about that and excited to be a part of it, and honored to be representing Established and Startup of the Year in the conversation. Thanks again for everyone listening, and remember to subscribe to our show. Please review it. We love to see all the reviews come in. And also, if you have a startup idea and you want to get something going, today is the best day to start. Remember that. You can jot it down, get it going. It doesn't have to be launched today, but get those creative juices going, write the things down, build upon it, iterate, and you'll be well on your way. So until next time, I'm Frank Gruber, signing off. Stay safe and be well out there.
Thanks for listening to the Startup of the Year podcast. Be sure to subscribe and we'll be back with another episode soon.